David, for joining us. Today we have David Sullivan, who is also the Executive Director of Digital Trust and Safety Partnership. He's known for his work in the space of human rights and technology policy. He's a practitioner, he's a big-time practitioner. And thank you, David, for giving us a time today. We really love having conversations with you offline, online, both. And today in this video, we want to learn from you how trust and safety as an industry has taken a shape to talk about safety policies, user safety, and the few thoughts on these lines. So I want to begin by asking you if you could share a bit more about yourself, your journey, and your work.
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for the opportunity. My journey into the field of trust and safety is a little bit unusual, I think, but maybe less unusual than it is these days because the field is changing so quickly. I started my career really working in humanitarian assistance and international development, working with relief organizations in Africa, working on elections and democracy in South Asia, and working on human rights advocacy, and first sort of came to working with technology companies on these kinds of challenging social issues around supply chains for raw materials, and how those supply chains were affecting conflict in parts of Central Africa. And what I found was that companies could be a very powerful actor, sometimes for ill, but also when their, I think, interests and values are aligned and they're brought into the conversation in the right way, they can exert really powerful, positive force in the world. That brought me to working with internet and telecommunications companies on issues like freedom of expression and privacy at the Global Network Initiative, where I spent about 10 years working with companies, including big social media companies like Meta and Google and Microsoft, but also telecommunications companies from around the world, along with human rights organizations and civil society organizations, academic experts, to collaborate on sort of what are the best ways that companies can adopt human rights-based approaches to dealing with government demands, government orders, those kinds of issues. And that is what brought me to trust and safety, recognizing that while there are still many truly important challenges when it comes to how governments exert pressure on technology companies, that there are also all of the issues that are top of mind these days about how companies develop and enforce their community guidelines and what kind of user-generated content they allow on their sites, and how to balance user safety with things like human rights. And that led me to join the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership nearly 3 years ago, and where I've been working with a group of companies on a framework of best practices for trust and safety.
That's incredible, because I also wanted to deep dive into some of the personal experiences that has influenced you to approach trust and safety in the digital age, with your extensive experience in this field.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this, and I think a few personal experiences that I've brought to bear. So the first, as I mentioned, the work that I did on supply chains, and in particular for raw materials including minerals in Eastern Congo that were part of the armed conflict there. And how those minerals were making their way through the supply chain, ultimately into our phones and computers and all of our gadgets. And at the time, that was seen as a very, it was almost impossible, is what people would say, because there were so many steps in the supply chain that could keep companies from understanding whether their products were made sourcing these materials, and what they could do about it. And what we found in that work is that when organizations like the one that I was working for, a human rights NGO, were able to get on the same page with those companies and help them to conduct the right kind of due diligence and adopt the right types of policies, they were able to figure out where their materials were coming from and able to, I think, exert a positive force in terms of peace building on the ground there. And I think I've brought that same kind of approach when it comes to the digital world and to trust and safety online. I think the other thing is really that when I started working on human rights online, I perhaps coming from the United States, sort of thought, okay, well, these issues around freedom of expression and censorship are really challenges that are for companies who are operating in, let's say, more authoritarian settings, that in democracies like the United States, we don't have to worry about this. And I was quickly proven wrong when it comes to that, and learned things are much more complicated, and that these issues around human rights are ones that we need to, I think, take just as seriously in democracies as we do in other types of governments.
That is so true, because that is what the role is played by other authorities as well when it comes to shaping privacy and user safety over there. And when you mention about government and the role of government, so what is, in your opinion, that government should play a role in regulating trust and safety on the internet, because that's where the regulation is happening mainly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that governments, really have an obligation to protect human rights, protect the human rights of their citizens. So I think they really ought to be taking a sort of human rights by design approach to thinking about technology regulation. And I think we see this coming up in many different countries all around the world that are considering what to do about some of these challenging issues around online content and conduct. But we also have to be careful that legislation that might be considered and adopted doesn't have unintended consequences that wind up restricting those rights instead of enabling them. So I think, the more that governments can really look and scrutinize the legislation that they're considering and thinking about those consequences, that's absolutely the most important thing. The other thing I would say is that right now, especially when it comes to these digital products and services that are being used globally by billions of people. And it's not just U.S. companies as well. I think increasingly, especially in a place like India, we're seeing Indian companies that are also developing products and services that are being used by hundreds of millions of people in India and in many other countries around the world. We need to think about a coherent approach to regulation that works across borders, because these products are used across borders. And if every single country around the world has their own approach that doesn't work together with others, we're not going to succeed.
True that, because I feel that the companies which are developing these tools, which are developing these platforms for us to access it, it is worldwide, it is going global, and we need to have some kind of a intervention from all, or like from the global perspective as well, because that's where technology is also deep diving, and we all are adapting some of the other technologies overseas as well. There is a high influence of the US and the UK influence in India as well, when we talk about EU Act, when we talk about the online safety acts, which is existing. Somewhere we are following those footsteps, and also now India is shaping the act for itself, which is called the Digital India Act. And there is a lot of conversations going on globally as well. So that is the role of government, where I also feel they play a very critical role for the users as well, when it comes to user safety, when it comes to privacy. So on those lines, if I have to kind of ask you, how do you navigate the balance between regulation and innovation in tech industry, basically to promote online safety? So where would you draw that balance? What is that your opinion about the balancing technology and regulation over there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to have both a very rigorous approach to these issues, but one that is flexible, because I think we have when we talk about, we use these terms all the time, like platform, and we don't often define that. And a platform can mean many, many different things. We often think about, oh, social media, or we think about a search engine or messaging. But there are so many more platforms. There are so many more different types of products and services out there, whether that is dating apps, e-commerce, podcasts, getting into now sort of consumer AI products. And if we keep regulating for the products of today, we're going to miss regulating to enable the future products of tomorrow and of next year and the year after. So that's why at the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, which is an industry partnership to develop common best practices and standards for trust and safety, our approach is really to say that companies offering any type of digital service where they are conducting trust and safety operations, when they are thinking about how to deal with user-generated content and online behavior, that they can use the practices we have developed no matter what type of product they are using. So I think that is an example of the kind of flexible approach. And then you can be rigorous. You can evaluate how those practices are working through in-depth assessments, which we're developing. And I think that kind of approach will hopefully help balance that need for innovation and to encourage sort of new types of products that are going to deliver value to all kinds of users of these services, while still having the right kind of regulation that gets us to the right kind of safety.
Totally. And here I want to switch to a very critical topic of content moderation, because you've written extensively on this segment. And I read a couple of your articles on content moderation as well. So switching to that, while there's a lot of discussion going around and there's talks about the liability, who is liable to moderate the content. So in your opinion, if I have to ask you, what do you think, where does this liability lie actually when it comes to professional moderation as well? Who is more liable? How do you think that this can be regulated? What is the approach over there?
So it's actually, I think I want to pick up on your mention of professional moderation, because I think that does speak to history of kind of how content moderation works in digital products and services, because the origins of all of this on the internet was often volunteer moderation of communities by communities in the early internet of sort of bulletin boards and early products in the 90s, before the commercial internet developed. Then, really in the 2000s, I think, with, sort of social media and companies and products like Facebook, for instance, kind of growing to a global scale, that's when you started to see companies realize that they needed professional moderation, not just perhaps in-house, but also looking for additional partners and vendors who could provide that kind of moderation around the clock, around the world, and in many different languages. And there, I think we also saw a lot of the challenges that come up with moderation and a lot of the issues that have been raised in many different countries around the world about whether there are sufficient humans with the right skills in terms of language, in terms of cultural context, to be able to effectively moderate, kind of online content in all of these different environments. And that's a really challenging job. And I think it's one where it's important for the industry, whether that is the companies who are providing the services or their partners from, business process outsourcers and other kind of specialized companies, to ensure that people doing that kind of frontline review of content have the tools, have the training, have the career opportunities and career pathways to make sure that that's a rewarding job that can take people places. And I think that's still a work in progress. There's a lot of work to do, but it is one that is extremely important. I would also say that I do think this is a place where technology is going to be an important enabler of people in the trust and safety field. We've been working at the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership on a report about the use of AI for trust and safety that we'll be coming out with later this year. And I do think that one, AI tools, both traditional kind of AI, machine learning classifiers that help determine, whether content might be violating a certain policy, as well as generative AI and sort of all of the new opportunities that might bring, which are not without risks, but where there are opportunities to help enhance the work being done by humans as content moderators, content reviewers. And secondly, hopefully, that technology may help reduce the amount that those humans the amount of some of the worst content on the internet that those people have to spend reviewing each and every day. So I do think there hopefully are some opportunities bringing technology to bear in concert with people and practices and standards and processes across companies.
I hope that is considered across the globe as well, because that is what will be needed in the coming days when we talk about professional moderation, more of opportunities for people to learn. And that is where kind of the whole debate is shifting to now about content moderation. In your personal experience and working in the space, you have extensively worked on human rights and technology. So if I have to ask you about how do you ensure that human rights are prioritized in digital trust and safety efforts? So what are your comments and what are your thoughts upon that?
So I think it's a really important question, and I think that there is a need for I think sort of shared learning between professionals working inside companies, both on human rights and on trust and safety, and also outside of companies. I think one of the things that I've learned through the work is that when I was at the Global Network Initiative, working with companies on freedom of expression and privacy, we often worked with the human rights team at particularly larger companies that have enough people to have a human rights team. And those folks are thinking about all of the different human rights and how a given company or product might be affecting those rights and what kind of policies they need, and how to implement things like the UN guiding principles in business and human rights. When I came to the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership and was working in some cases with the same companies, but working on trust and safety practices, I realized I was working with different sets of teams. Teams from trust and safety operations or from content policy. And those people often worked together with their colleagues from the human rights teams, but were coming with a background, a sort of different set of skills. And I think that sharing knowledge and sharing skills between those teams, and this doesn't just apply for inside big companies. This is also true when it comes to whether it's people working in government, people working for NGOs, that there are more opportunities to learn from each other and to use human rights as kind of a way of organizing and thinking about, what issues are most important. One of the things that human rights brings to bear is a universal framework that is accepted everywhere, that we can look at specific rights and we can think about, what the relationship between a given digital product or service and those rights is. And we can think about things like risk assessment and due diligence. And that, I think, is an important opportunity as trust and safety matures and develops, to learn from those human rights frameworks. I've also been doing some work recently with the World Economic Forum Global Coalition for Digital Safety, which is a really interesting public-private partnership that includes many governments, as well as companies, big and small, international organizations, NGOs, whether those are like sort of child protection organizations or human rights organizations. And we developed a report last year on risk assessment for digital safety. And we developed some case studies because we realized that although a digital safety risk assessment is a new tool that in some cases is being required by regulation. But in other cases, there's all kinds of risk assessments people have already been doing. And so this is a chance to learn from what's been done in the past. So whether that's human rights impact assessments or AI assessments, there's all kinds of tools out there and we can learn from.
I think I should have asked you this question earlier because that was on my mind. What are the current initiatives that you're working on? Thank you for highlighting that about that report and the whole public-private partnership, where, and you very rightly mentioned about, we need to have that kind of balance in the ecosystem as well when we talk about human rights. And this balance can only come in when we bring together different people from different professions together, and they also sense why human rights is a key over here. We need to kind of, it needs to be more respected over there when it comes to either public policy, content policies, products and designs. So that needs to be taken care of, and that balance needs to be just maintained when we talk about trust and safety as well in the ecosystem. So with this, I want to kind of ask you, or for all the viewers, especially who is watching this episode with fantastic David Sullivan, that what advice you would like to give to the emerging leaders in the field of digital trust and safety today? As I see, it is growing very much in India. And to probably it might come to your surprise that in India, as a civil society organization, it's only us who is talking about trust and safety as of now. But I hope this grows very as soon, very soon. But what advice that you would like to give to the emerging leaders?
So I think maybe the number one piece of advice that I have, and really I think it's important for not just people like me to be giving advice, but also be listening and learning from people who are emerging in the field and coming from other places and other perspectives. But I do think ultimately what we're looking at are human problems, problems of how people interact with each other, which might be a little bit supercharged by technology, more than this is a technology problem. So we can't kind of tech our way out of human problems, but we have to think about how we can use that combination of technology and people to try to kind of reduce the risks that are out there. We're never going to eliminate them entirely because, ultimately the challenges we're talking about, whether it comes to children online, when it comes to extremism or online harassment and abuse, these are human problems. They're going to keep manifesting in different ways and shapes and forms. But we need to work together to try to reduce them. So that's one piece of it. I do think that it's also important to, bear in mind the history and look at how trust and safety has developed and sort of not forget lessons we've already learned. But do that in a way where we're also recognizing that, no one has done this perfectly, and that it's really important that we work together and think about, what the experience is of people around the world, not just what the experience of technology companies from the United States, sort of are.
Totally. And David, if I can ask you to quickly and briefly tell people what exactly trust and safety is, what are the core themes that are covered under this broader industry, so that people also know who want to kind of, look into trust and safety as a profession, they would know that this is a better fit for them.
Yeah. So at the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, which brings together companies who are providing these services around a set of best practices, we think about this through a framework of 5 overarching commitments around product development. So are we designing and developing digital products with safety in mind from the get-go? about governance. What are the rules about how people should use a given product? How are those rules or guidelines developed? How are they incorporating user input into those rules, and how are they up? So actually like enforcing the rules. And that's usually a combination of again, people to, sort of, identify content that violates the rules and take action against it. Improvement over time, having that kind of continuous improvement approach. And then finally, transparency with the public, with users, whether that's through transparency reporting or other kinds of partnerships and way of being transparent about one's work. So, trust and safety is really about making sure that digital products are not being used to cause harm to people and communities around the world. The teams that work on trust and safety, they may have different names depending on what type of company and how large it is. There are companies with dozens of teams working on different issues related to trust and safety, and there's others where there might be just one person and trust and safety is just part of their job. And so that's why it can be sometimes challenging to navigate.
Thank you for sharing that for the viewers to know that what exactly trust and safety work is like and how you can explore this industry if you are thinking about joining trust and safety. So this is my second last question to you. If I have to ask you that, what resources or actions that an individual can basically look into to better understand what trust and safety initiatives are, what will your comments be on this?
So there are a lot of resources that did not exist just a couple of years ago when it comes to trust and safety as a function, as an industry, as a field. And I'm happy to direct folks to them. So in addition to the work we do at the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, which is a partnership of organizations, there's also terrific work being done by the Trust and Safety Professional Association, which is a professional society for individuals. And they also, whether you are a member, when you have to work in trust and safety to be a member, but even if you're not a member, they organize events, online webinars. They have a curriculum and all kinds of resources on their website that I would encourage folks to look at. I would also shout out the folks from All Tech is Human, who are, I think, really building a community that is increasingly international, of people working in all different types of fields related to making technology work for humanity. So whether that's responsible AI, whether that is tech policy, whether that is trust and safety, the All Tech is Human community is also an excellent one to get involved with. And really, those are just a couple of examples. I could go on for quite a while.
And I think so this interview is also a resource which has been added to trust and safety work now, because David is incredible for the work he has been doing. And we are so much thankful to having him today for this particular talk. David, my last question to you, which might be just a surprise to you, that who would you like to recommend as the next person to join for our trust and safety talks, if you have to choose one out of many?
Oh, wow. That's a that's a good one. I will maybe consider so certainly Charlotte Wilner and the team from the Trust and Safety Professional Association, I think, would be excellent guests. And so I would recommend them, but I'm sure there will be other names that I will email you afterwards and suggest, because there are quite a few folks that are doing great work in this space that it would be great for you to be able to connect with and highlight.
Thank you. We'll certainly connect with Charlotte because I know she's doing incredible work with TSPA, and we met her in Singapore last year during the APAC Summit, and we hope to see her again during the APAC Summit. So looking forward to meet her, and also looking forward to have her on our Trust and Safety Talks. Thank you, David, for your time today. This was superb because we got to hear from you, who has been working into this space for a very long time and adding value to the whole industry. This was incredible. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure.